Hi, this is Shreyang Siddharth and welcome to my course Node Getting Started.
Node, also known as Node.js, is an open source server environment that allows you to run JavaScript on the server. It is popularly known for its usage in backend servers and create networking applications. Big players like PayPal, Netflix, LinkedIn, and even NASA are using it for their backend, which makes it even more cool. Well, this is a very short course and is meant just to get you started with Node.js as quickly as possible. If you have zero knowledge on Node, then you have just landed in the right place. Before you start, you should know at least one object-oriented programming language. It could be any. If you know JavaScript, then you will have plus point for this course. But if you don't, still you will understand this course pretty well. This course is hands-on. That is, you can code along with me in each of the video. For your convenience, I have uploaded all the code files to the GitHub, the link to which you will find in the description below each of the video of the course.
And yes, I will be your instructor throughout the course and will be there to guide you if you face any kind of difficulty while following the course. If this excites you, then join me on this journey to learn Node only at SmartHerd. See you in the course. So before we start, let's get an overview of what exactly is Node and what is Node.js.
Well, Node and Node.js are exactly the same thing. You can say Node is a nickname of Node.js and vice versa. The JS extension that you can see here stands for JavaScript. So here is probably the most simplest definition of Node. It's a JavaScript on your backend servers. Well, before Node, that was not easy to use JavaScript on your backend server. JavaScript was mainly used for front-end. But with Node, you can now use JavaScript in your backend. But this isn't really a complete definition because Node offers a lot more thing than executing JavaScript on the server. In fact, execution of JavaScript on the server is not done by Node at all. It's done with a virtual machine like V8 Engine by Google. So you can now define Node as just a wrapper around virtual machine, that is VM. You can call it like a coordinator who instructs VM to execute your JavaScript code in the server. Now apart from V8, you can use other virtual machine such as Chakra. But V8 is actually the default virtual machine for Node and is probably used by most of the Node developers. So when you write JavaScript from Node, Node will pass your JavaScript to V8, which is your virtual machine. Then V8 will execute that JavaScript and tell Node what the result is, and Node will make result available to you. Well, that's a very simple story. So you can now define Node as a wrapper around V8 with some handy built-in modules providing rich features through easy-to-use asynchronous APIs. Well, the term module and asynchronous APIs might look overwhelming to you as a beginner. We will throw some light on that shortly. So this leads to another important question. Is Node only used for backend? Well, you can use Node not only in backend servers to execute JavaScript code, but also you can use it in your front-end application development. In the front end, you can use it to automate your daily tasks, such as builds or unit tests. At present, Angular is also using Node for installing packages and compilation of TypeScript to improve front-end software development. How cool is that? Well, Node offers a lot more than what I have mentioned here. But for now, let's not go into details. We will drill down the Node usage and concepts as we proceed with the course. Now, why Node? Why Node is widely being adopted by developers worldwide, despite the availability of other platforms. You may have heard of .NET, PHP, Ruby on Rails, cloud-based platforms like AWS Lambda and Azure Functions. So why we are learning Node and how it is different from other platforms? Let us throw some light on that. So besides being an easy way to execute and work with JavaScript on the server, Node comes with great built-in modules. Each module offers functionalities such as handling file system, handling HTTP request and response, and there are a lot more of such kind. Well, these modules provide asynchronous programming in Node. That is, they are capable to execute tasks in parallel without any need to deal with threads. And this is probably the biggest benefit of using runtime language like Node. And if the built-in packages were not enough for you, you can build highly performing packages using C++. Because Node has a first-class support for C++ add-ons. And of course, you can also write your add-ons in JavaScript if you want to. Node also ships with a powerful debugger. Now if you are going to learn Node, then you need to get familiar with the word of NPM, which stands for Node Package Manager. Well, prior to Node, we did not have a package manager for a long time in the JavaScript world. NPM has changed the way we write code for JavaScript. Well, NPM is basically the world's biggest collection of free and reusable code. You can make a feature-rich Node application just by using the code that's freely available on NPM website. So npmjs.com is the official site where you will find all the libraries which you can use in your Node application. For example, if you want to use the HTTP library in your project, so simply look for HTTP and then you will find a lot of options here available for you. You can select any of these and use it in your own application, and we will see how to use them in your project later in this course. Now the other big thing about Node is that it comes with reliable module dependency manager, which is actually different than NPM. Well, this manager is often referred to as CommonJS, and again it is another thing that we did not have in the JavaScript world prior to Node. With Node, you can have single language across the full stack, that is in both backend and frontend, by just using JavaScript. So use JavaScript in your backend and use it for your browser in your frontend, which means less syntax and therefore commit less mistakes. This also means that you can have better integration between your front-end code and your back-end code. Now, apart from all of these advantages, Node has its own disadvantages as well. In the NPM, you will find too many options available to choose from, leading to a big confusion. For example, if you look for HTTP library to use it in your project, then you will find a lot of options here as a search result. Well, you need to spend some time looking for the best library that will fit for your project. Now using NPM, you can use smaller packages in your project. That leads to too many packages in one single project. Typically, a live project can contain more than 300 packages. Now if you look at these 2 points from a different angle, then these 2 points might look like an advantage of using Node in your application. That is, smaller packages are easier to control and maintain, and of course, scale your application. So this eventually answers one more question. Why Node is called Node? Well, a Node project is made up of small packages, and each of these nodes represent small piece of code. So you can say that each of these nodes represent a single package, which you can get in your project with the help of NPM. That is Node Package Manager. Now all of these small packages, that is nodes, are capable to communicate with each other and together creates a complete Node application, which of course becomes scalable and maintainable. So with this we have got enough reasons to continue with this course and learn Node.
So let us continue this course and learn how to install Node.js in your system in the next lesson. See you there. So let's learn how to install Node.js in our system. And by default, when we install Node.js, the Node Package Manager, also known as NPM, also gets installed in our system. So let's get started.
So as the first step, all you have to do is go to this website nodejs.org and then download this LTS version, which stands for long-term support version. Once you download it, install it like you install any other application in your Mac or Windows or Linux. If you want a complete step-by-step process how to install Node in your system along with NPM, then simply refer these 3 videos. I have created Node installation video for each of Windows, Mac and Linux. The link is in the description. Kindly go through those videos. Once you install Node, open your terminal if you are on Mac or open your command prompt if you are on Windows and then type node space -v to check what is the version of Node. So this is my version. In your case, the version might vary. So in that case, don't worry about it. Also check for NPM version. It should show you some version.
So once these commands are working in your system, you are good to go with the next lesson of this course, where we will play with the basics of Node.js using REPL. See you there. Hi, welcome back. So in this lesson, we will play with Node.js using REPL. Well, REPL stands for Read Eval Print Loop. So let's get started.
Simply open your terminal if you are on Mac or Linux, or simply open your command prompt if you are on Windows. To start a REPL session, just type node and hit enter. Node will then start a REPL session. REPL stands for Read Eval Print Loop, and it's a very convenient way to quickly test simple JavaScript code and also the Node commands. So you can type anything in JavaScript here in your REPL session. For example, math.square root. Hit enter, it will then give you a desired result. So Node will just read your line, evaluate it, print the result, and then go back to waiting for further lines. So this is where REPL got its name. Read the line, evaluate it, print it, and loop until the user exits the REPL. So in the very next step, you can write further code, for example, 3 plus 4. Great. Now always remember, in the REPL, if you want some output, then always you have to write some expression. If you write a statement, variable, score equal to 23, hit enter, the result will be undefined. Because in JavaScript, it is just a statement, it is not an expression which can be evaluated and give you the output. So here the output will be undefined. On the other hand, let us type an expression, 4 equal to the character value of 4. Well, it is kind of Boolean expression in JavaScript. If you hit enter, it will simply give you the output of true, because in JavaScript, both will be evaluated as same. Now sometimes instead of just writing one statement, you need to write multiple lines of code. So for now, I will just clear the session by simply pressing Ctrl plus L. Remember, Ctrl plus L. So always remember that. Now let us define a function which prints out the current date. You can either type it or you can even copy and paste it from the clipboard. Now give a starting curly bracket, hit enter. So here the Node REPL is smart enough to understand that you are about to write some body of the function in the next line. So now you can type return new date object. Hit enter again, end the function with the help of ending curly bracket. If you now hit enter, it says undefined because it is just a statement. So we need to call this function if you want some output. So call this function like you call any function in any programming language. So here is the output. Great, isn't it? Now this multi-line mode in REPL is quite limited because you cannot write bunch of code in your REPL session. So for that we need to write some code by using the editor in REPL. To start an editor in REPL, all you have to do is type .editor. Hit enter, and then you can either type all the code or even paste the code from the clipboard, like this. Once you are done typing, simply press Ctrl plus D. All the functions that you have defined here in the editor will now be available in your REPL session. So if you call square root of some number, for example 49, then you will get the result. Now apart from .editor command in REPL, we have various other commands as well. To check those commands, type .help. You will get all of these commands. For example, break, clear, editor, exit, help, load and save the file. Right now I will simply clear the session by pressing Ctrl plus L and type .help again, and then try to use the break command. We use break command when you paste some code in the node multi-line mode like this, and you find yourself that you are lost in nesting the curly brackets of the functions. So in that case, what you can do, simply hit enter and press .break. It will just discard everything and get you out of the loop. And then you can write your code freshly in the REPL session. This saves you from killing the whole session to get yourself out of simple situations like this. Now let us clear everything and start fresh. Suppose I define a function, and then I define another function. Let us write one more function. So altogether I have 3 functions defined in my REPL session. Well, these functions are now saved and ready to be used in your REPL session. For example, you can call these functions individually to get the output. But right now my objective is to save these functions in a separate file, or you can say an external file, which I can review it later or maybe push it to the GitHub. So for that we have a special command of .save. Give a space and provide the file name. I will provide the file name as firstdebut.js. Hit enter. It will say session saved to this file. Now later on, if you want to load that file, so all you have to do is simply type .load command followed by the file name. Hit enter. It will simply load the content of the file that you just saved. And now these functions are ready to be called in your REPL session. For example, if I call today, I will get the output accordingly. Similarly, multiply and pass 2 numbers. Well, I guess I did some mistake. Let us type multiply correctly. Hit enter. There we go, 6. Third function. Great, isn't it? So this is how we use REPL in Node. And trust me, if you want to be a professional Node developer, then REPL is your thing. You will need to use REPL in your development journey quite frequently.
So yes, that's all for this lesson. From the next lesson onwards, we will start building our Node application. So in the next lesson, we will learn how to create your first application in Node. So pause the video, grab some coffee and come back. See you there.
Creating first Node application and running our first local server in Node. From the previous video, we know that how Node uses virtual machine such as V8 engine to execute JavaScript. Well, this is something that happens in the backend server. Now this backend server needs to be consumed by some front-end client. And this client can be a mobile device such as Android or iOS or even a website. The communication between front-end and backend takes place using HTTP request and response. So in this video, you will learn how to set up a local web server using Node and run your first code in Node. Let's begin. So open your terminal if you are on Mac or Linux, or open your command prompt if you are on Windows. Also, before you start, you have to download your exercise files of this course, the link to which is available in the description below the video. Once you download the files, you will get this folder 4-first-app. Within that, you will find these 2 files. So make sure you open these 2 files. So here I am using Sublime Text Editor. You can use any editor of your own choice. And also, once you download the exercise files, you have to navigate to this folder in your terminal or command prompt. So simply type cd, give it a space, and drag and drop this folder. Hit enter. So now we are inside this folder. Let us type ls to find out the file content. So these are the 2 files that are present here. So both of them are in the same folder. Alright, so here is the Node Hello World example on the right, which is an example of a very simple web server. Well, do not worry about this code here. We will break it down into smaller pieces and understand it well. Now to execute this file, all you have to do is type node space the file name. Hit tab and then hit enter. Well, if the script you are executing contains a running task like a web server listening for a connection, then Node will continue to run. Like here, our server is up and running. To stop this program or to end this task, you need to press Ctrl plus C. When you press it, your Node process will eventually terminate. But on the other hand, for example, in this file of printhello.js, we have a very small script that just do not contain a running task. For example, here we are just printing a message. So if you run this file, then Node will immediately execute this file and automatically terminate by just printing out the message like this. Now, when the node is idle, that is, it is waiting for your next command, then it won't consume your resources in the background. But if you run this script again, let us clear our terminal by pressing Ctrl plus L and run the script again. Then the node process will become active and start to consume resources. This means when your server is up and running, it listens to all the HTTP connections. However, this node process will only use V8, that is our virtual machine in the backend, to execute JavaScript only when there is an established HTTP connection. Otherwise, the V8 will remain idle. So now that you know how to execute your JavaScript code, let us explore our first code. So the very first line is the require function. This is a constant variable and this is a require function. Well, this require function is used to manage your script dependencies. You can use this require function to include any library such as HTTP in our case in your script. Well, in Node we generally refer to such thing as a module, but you can call it as library as well. So you can call this HTTP as a HTTP module or HTTP library. And this module can be the built-in module or it can be some external third-party module. But here this HTTP module is a built-in Node module. And this HTTP module has a feature of creating a web server. Well, there are many other libraries apart from HTTP to create a web server. But this module is a built-in module present in Node. So you don't need to install anything extra to use it, but you just need to use the require function to include it in your script. Once you include the module, you can use its function, such as here we are using create server function that belongs to HTTP module. Well, this function is responsible to create a simple web server and it accepts one parameter and this parameter is known as request listener. Now if you notice, this parameter looks pretty weird, but if you take a look at this parameter, then you will find that it is actually a function without any name. Such as this whole parameter, a single parameter, is actually a function. Here you will find that it is the two parameter of this anonymous function, a function without name. And then we have a method body right here. The syntax is a bit different, but it is actually a function. Now in JavaScript, you can pass a function as a parameter to another function, like here we are passing a function within the create server method or the function. Well, at once, if you are a beginner in JavaScript, this might look pretty weird, but trust me, you will get used to it. Because in JavaScript, you can pass a function as a parameter to some other function. And don't worry about this if it is new to you. I will talk about it in detail in my upcoming videos as well. For now, let us focus on the concept. Now this function receives the first parameter as the request object. And this request object is basically the HTTP request coming from the client. That is, whenever there is a HTTP request from the client, the server will invoke this function. Right now it is named as rec. You can name it as per your wish. For example, I can change it to request and then save the file. Now the other argument that this listener function receives is the response object. Right now it is res. You can again rename it to response or any other desired name of your choice. But accordingly, you have to make sure change its occurrence as well. For example, here res becomes response. And then let us format the code as it was before. Perfect. Well, this response is actually the HTTP response object which server sends back to the client after doing some modification. Here I have shown a very simple modification of response object. using the end function. I am inserting a body to the object that contains a string which says hello world. Perfect. Well, you will learn about this end function in detail in my upcoming videos of this series, but for now just remember the end function writes data and then end the connection. So overall this create server function just creates the server, but our server is not yet activated. To activate our web server, we have a special function. We need to call listen function on our created server, which you can find here. Once you call it, the server gets activated. Now again, this function accepts several parameters, like what OS port to use for this server. Well, you can change this port number, which is currently 4242, to 9000 or even 7000. Like this, it is totally up to your choice. Let's keep it 9000 for now. Now the second argument here is actually a function. Let us take a look at this parameter from a different angle. So again we have a function as a second parameter, but this time this function has no parameter. It just has a body that prints out server is running. Again format the code back to what it was before. So this function will be invoked when the server starts to run on this port address. So within this function you can write your own code. Now it is time to run our server. After you do some changes, save the file and then here shut down the old Node server. Press Ctrl+C, rerun your Node server. Great. You can then open your browser and then ping that URL. So I will use localhost then :9000. Well, this 9000 is actually the port number that we have defined here. So we are getting hello world. Now this hello world is the same message that we have mentioned here in the response object. If you want, you can change it. For example, hello from different world. Save it and then open your terminal, shut down the old server, Ctrl+C and rerun this server again. Go to your browser and refresh the page. You will get hello from different world. How cool is that? If you now terminate your server, Ctrl+C and then refresh the page, then you will get nothing. The site cannot be reached because we have just shut down our server. Okay, now as a beginner, there must be several questions and curiosity to know more about this script. What else is happening, how this end function works, and what this port actually is. So in the next video, we will continue our discussion and dive deeper and inspect the code. See you there. In this video, let us continue our discussion and inspect our first Node application in detail. Now for the first time, this code where I am passing a function as a parameter to this create server function might look a bit confusing to you. So let's make it a bit simpler. Now in JavaScript, everything that you see is actually an object. For example, this whole statement on the right represents one object, and this variable on the left stores the reference to that object. Similarly here, this whole statement is actually an object, which is being stored in the reference of server. Similarly, any function that you see in JavaScript is basically an object. So here if you define constant request listener and paste the function that you are passing here as a parameter, cut it and paste it here, then you will find that here we have one object which is being referred by this variable of request listener. And also note that this function does not contain any name. It just contains some parameters with a body like this. Now this variable is pointing to this function. That is, this variable represents that function. So here as a parameter you can actually pass request listener. Now one important thing to note here is that you do not call this function by using brackets like this, like you call any function in any programming language. But instead you just pass the reference to that function like this, just the variable name. Fine. Well, there is a big difference between these two. By using the reference, you just mean that in the runtime this variable will be replaced by this function as a parameter within this create server function. Now coming back to this request listener. Well, from the previous video, we know that this function will be invoked whenever there is an HTTP request from client. That is, when a client send request to the server, then this function will be invoked. So inside this function, you can read all information about your HTTP request, which is stored within this variable of request. And by information, I means that you can extract what URL is user sending along, or what IP address are they coming from, and many other things. And this end function is being used to write data to this response object and then close the connection. Now this statement is actually equivalent to two statements which I will show you right now, such as response.write the message and then response.end, like this. So these two statements are equivalent to this single line of code. Or you can say that this statement is just a shortcut to write data to the response object and then end the connection. Since it is an HTTP communication thing, we need to follow some HTTP protocol. And that protocol, for example, requires an explicit signal that the communication is over. This is exactly why we needed to use .end method here. Well, visually it means that until the end function is called, the HTTP session will think that we are still working on the response object. But once end function is called or executed, the server sends back response object to the client, hence closes the HTTP connection. This means the communication between client and server is now over. Now moving on, of course, in the previous video we talked about create server function, where we talked about it just creates the server but does not activates it. So to activate the server, we have listen function, which we call on our server object. So here we are passing the first argument as the port number, with which your server will interact with the client on your operating system. And here again, as a second parameter, we are passing a function. To make things simple, here again we can create a variable and call it as confirmation listener, or you can say confirmation callback. Why callback? Because this function will only be executed if the server is up and running at this port. So I will simply cut it from here and paste it here. And as usual, I will pass this confirmation callback reference here. Save the file. So this function acts as a confirmation that hey, now our server is ready and up and running. So that is why I am printing a message here, server is running. You can change the message as per your wish. And before you run this file, make sure you are currently under this folder and then use node space the file name. Now also note that when we ran this file, the node process did not exit immediately because the event loop is now also busy listening to the incoming connections on the port of 9000, which we have mentioned here. So that is why when you hit refresh here, we get some message from the server and it will continue to listen to this port until you stop this server by pressing Ctrl+C. Great, isn't it? So I hope now you know all the in and out of your first Node application. Congratulations, we can now dive deeper and explore Node in detail from the next video onwards. See you and have a nice day. In this video, we will explore how internally HTTP request and response objects looks like in case of Node. So currently I am within this folder of 6 request and response. You will get this folder along with the code on the right from the exercise files of this course. The link is in the description. Now these code we already saw in the previous videos. So let's begin. So here within this request listener function, we have HTTP request and HTTP response object. Let us talk about them a bit more. How to use them, what information and capabilities do they provide, how to know what to do with them. The easiest way to explore them is to log them. For example, you can use console.log statement and print out HTTP request object. Save the file and run that file. Once you are done, hit this URL. Well, once you hit this URL, you will find the message being displayed here. But in the terminal, you will find we have something dumped in our terminal. and this looks pretty overwhelming. Well, it is basically the request object. It has a lot of properties and it has printed a lot of nested properties, including the main properties of the request object. Well, right now it is a bit harder to read as a beginner. To get the smaller output, all we have to do is go to your program and try to use a different function such as dir. And then as a second parameter, let us define the depth as 0. Save the file and then shut down the server, Ctrl C, and rerun the file. Once your server is again up and running, go to your browser and refresh the page. Once you refresh it, you will find a smaller output starting from here. And depth equal to 0 simply means we are going to print out only the first level of properties for this request object, which you can find on the left. So here if you notice, the very first class that you can see here is the incoming message class, which means the HTTP request which we are sending from the client to the server is actually of the type of incoming message. You might ask how it is helpful for us. Well, if you want to know what are the operations or actions or properties which you can extract from this HTTP request, then you have to check the documentation of incoming message class in the official website. So for that, I will go to the new tab and look for Node.js API. Go to the first link, that is Node.js org/API/index. If you go there and maximize it, then you will find the HTTP documentation here. And then search for incoming message. Well, here we go. This is our class of HTTP incoming message. And within this class, we have all of these properties, which you can make use of. Also make a note that sometimes developer get confused with the class of client request, which you will find here. Well, this client request is some other class and does not represent HTTP request object. It is something different. The main HTTP request object is actually this class of incoming message. Now the other thing that is worth to note is that in the terminal you will find the incoming message was printed twice. For example, here we have incoming message with all the properties, and down below again we have another incoming message object, again with some properties. Which means that this statement was actually executed twice, which again means that for a single HTTP request coming from the client, the listener function that we have here is executed twice. So this means all of these code present here are executed twice whenever there is any HTTP request. Now the question arises, does this incoming message object and also this incoming message object are same? Well, the answer is no, they both are different. The most significant difference that you will find is in the URL object or the URL property. For the first incoming message, the URL represent the endpoint URL as just /, which we will talk about it later. And in the second incoming object, you will find the URL object has a value of favicon. Well, you can even print those properties. For example, console.log and just type request.url. And also for the sake of more clarity, let us print one more log statement. This time print out test message, just a dummy string value. Save it, shut down the server, clear the console, and then rerun the script. And as a next step, go to your browser, localhost, and just refresh the page. Once you refresh it, come back to your terminal. So here we go. If you notice, for the first time we are getting the URL as just the endpoint URL of the home page along with the test message. And the second time this function was executed, we are getting favicon along with the test message. Now the first URL actually represent this base URL with a slash in the end, like this. Fine. Now the second URL, the favicon, simply look for the favicon present in the server. Now if you don't know what is a favicon, well, this icon is actually the favicon. For the Node.js website, this icon is actually again the favicon. Now proceeding, let us explore this response object. Now this response object is actually the HTTP response object that we are sending back to the client from the server. Let us use the same approach to log that out by using console.dir response object with the depth of 0 and remove this test message. Save the file, shut down the server and restart it. And then refresh your page. So once you do it, you will find all the details of our response object. So the response object is of the type of server response class. So in the documentation, you will find what data you can send back to the client. For example, if you go to the documentation, then using that response object, you can actually get the header or set the header. Even set the timeout, set the status code, or write data to the response body of the object. How cool is that? You can control anything and everything whatever you want to. And in the terminal in our console, you will find that many of these properties has some default value. For example, writable as true, has body as true, and many other things. So that was all about request and response object. We just explored them in detail. Now another thing to note here is that these request and response objects are actually the streams. The request object is a readable stream. That is, using this request object, you can actually read the content of the request object, but you cannot write something to it. But this response object is both readable and writable. You can read it and even modify it like we are doing it here. We are writing some data to the body of this response object. Now since these two objects are streams, so they are also the event emitters. Now what are streams and what are event emitters? We will check them in our upcoming videos of this series, so please don't worry about them. In the next video, let us summarize what we have covered so far in our initial journey to learn Node. So finally we have reached the end of the first section, getting started with Node. So in this section, initially we saw what exactly is Node.js and why Node is called as Node. Then we explored how to set up Node in your system, and you can use Mac, Windows or Linux to execute Node. Then we created our first application in Node and also learned how to set up our first local server in Node. And along with this, we also saw how the communication between the client and the server takes place by using HTTP request and response. We also explored in details how Node executes JavaScript using V8 in the backend. And in the end, we also explored in details what are request and response objects. Well, just remember, internally the request object is actually the incoming message class, and the response object is of the type of server response object. And you can always use the official website of nodejs.org/API to explore about each of the built-in modules and libraries. The documentation is very simple. So that's all for this getting started section. In the next section, we will continue our discussion. So thanks for watching, see you and have a nice day. Thank you. Hi, welcome to the next section of this course. In this section, I will show you the syntax and basics of modern JavaScript. Now before we proceed, why modern JavaScript? Why not just JavaScript? Well, JavaScript is now a very different language than it was used to be just a few years ago. Most of the developers still use traditional approach to use JavaScript. So is it really a different JavaScript? Well, of course yes. Well, if you already know JavaScript, then it is possible that you are using traditional JavaScript that conforms to ES5. This version rolled out in 2009. But in 2015, ES6 rolled out, which was a major change in the history of JavaScript. Well, ES6 introduced more than 64 changes to the JavaScript language. It was like a revolution in JavaScript world, and those changes are widely now supported by developers community. Right after ES6, we had various other versions, such as ES7, ES8 and so on. But those were minor updates. So if you use the word of modern JavaScript, then you are probably saying ES6. You might ask now, what is ES here and here? Well, ES stands for ECMAScript, which JavaScript language is based upon. Today, the ECMAScript technical community, which is known as TC39, releases a new version of ECMAScript and JavaScript engine like V8 every year. Shortly after that, the new release of new JavaScript version is released for developers based on that ECMAScript so released. Well, it all started in 2015 and since then every year we have new JavaScript release. Now anybody can propose a new feature to this committee. You can also propose a feature from your side if you think JavaScript should have that feature. The TC39 committee has a 5-stage process to filter and finalize the features that are considered for the language. If you go into details, you will find the process here. It starts with stage 0, where anyone can propose anything to the committee. Once it gets approved, it follows stage 1, stage 2 and stage 3. And finally in stage 4, you will see your proposal in the next JavaScript stable release. How cool is that? You can actively participate to create and add features to modern JavaScript. Well, at any point of time, if you feel that the new JavaScript syntax under progress is a bit difficult to write and read, then you can use Babel compiler that converts your modern JavaScript into traditional JavaScript before you use your code for production. Well, this Babel compiler is very popular compiler for this. You can use it effectively and get the code. Now this section is meant for those who have zero knowledge of JavaScript, as this course comes with no JavaScript prerequisite. But if you know JavaScript, then there might be possibility that you are using traditional JavaScript. So I recommend you to go through this section and understand few important concepts of ES6, which I am going to discuss in my next few videos of this section. Well, don't worry, this section is going to be a very short section and will work as a buffer for rest of the course. Variables and blocks in modern JavaScript. So in this video, we will learn how to define variables along with blocks and its scopes in terms of modern JavaScript. Currently we are in section 2 and we are about to check out the second video of this section. So before you start, make sure within this folder 2.2 var block, you will find these two files. Kindly get it from the link in the description. Along with this, make sure in your terminal or in your command prompt, you navigate to this folder of 2.2 var block, which is actually this folder right here. Once you are ready, let's begin. Let us start a REPL session and type a very weird syntax to define block, such as this code. Well, looking at this, do you think it is a valid code? Let us execute it. Well, yes, because there was no error. Well, these are actually nested blocks. Actually, there are 3 blocks, one within another. So within these blocks, if you define a variable such as var score equal to 67 and execute it, then you can access that variable of score. Great, isn't it? So exit your REPL session, Ctrl D, and clear the console. And let us come to our script. So a block in JavaScript is represented with the help of pair of curly bracket. So the scope between these two curly bracket is known as the block scope, and the block scope is applicable for if block as well, like this. Similarly, for the for loop, the block scope is present here. Great, isn't it? Now the block scopes are a bit different than the function scope, which is basically the method body of a function here. So please do not get confused with what is a block scope and what is a function scope. They both are different. Now you might ask practically how they are different. So here is the example for that. So within your block scope, suppose you define a variable and then try to access this variable outside this block scope. When you save the file and try to run it in your console, then you will get 31 in the output console. This shows that outside this block scope, we are able to access the score variable here. Now what about the function scope? Suppose within this function we define again a variable and try to access this variable outside this function. Then save the script and execute it. You will find that we have some error. it says reference error. The age is not defined here. So this means that the function scope are different than the block scope. So whatever variable that you define within a function scope is available to use only within the function scope here, not outside it. So this statement throws an error, so let us comment it. Now let us come to this for loop. So here we have variable I equal to 1. So this variable is actually a part of this block scope. If you try to access this variable outside this block scope here and then run the file, Ctrl L, clear the console and run it, then you will find the value of I is 11 here. Now there are certain situations where you want this variable to be private within this block scope. So for that, in modern JavaScript, we have the let keyword. So apart from var, we have the let keyword. So let us try to use it as well. So instead of var, define let and then try to execute the code again. This time we have got an error that I is not defined, which means the let keyword enables you to make your variable private to the block scope, similar to what we encountered in case of age within the function scope. So now this I variable is private to our own block scope. Similarly, you can make this score variable as private to its own block scope by using the let keyword. Save the file. So this statement will now throw some error. Let us comment this. Also this statement, because they are now private. Now apart from let and var keyword, we have one more keyword of constant. Well, this keyword behaves very similar to the let keyword, but we use constant keyword to make a variable as constant in nature. That is immutable in nature. Its value won't change ever. So for that example, for the constant keyword on the right, I have one more file, toConstant.js. So here we have some code already written here. So when you use constant score equal to 42, it means the value of score will never change from 42. As such, if you try to use score equal to 60, this code will result into error. You can try it out. Right now I will just comment it. Similarly, the value of this variable message will never change because of the keyword of constant here. Similarly, for the arrays and object, you can use the constant keyword like we are using it here. And in JavaScript, we define a array like this. You can use constant or var or even let and then define the variable followed by the content of the array like this. And in JavaScript, you can define an object like this, constant object name equal to curly bracket open and close, and then you can define some properties like first name equal to this value, last name equal to this value. Quite simple, isn't it? So when you use constant numbers equal to this array, then later on you cannot change numbers equal to some other array such as 4, 5 or 6. This is not allowed. Fine. So here I will again comment it. But there is one difference while we use constant with our arrays or objects. That is, this number should always point to this array. You cannot change the array on the right like this. However, you are allowed to change or modify the content of this array. For example, if you try to change numbers at the index of 0 and change it to, let's say, 99, print the array before and after, and here as well print it out. Save the file and try to run it. Clear the console. So here we go, the number in the index of 0 has now changed. So while using constant, you are allowed to change the content of your array, but not the array itself. Similarly, for the objects as well, it behaves similarly. That is, for the student object, you cannot change the object itself, but the value of first name can change later to, let's say, Peter. It is allowed. Now in certain situation, if you want to freeze the value of the content of the array as well or the object, so in that case we have something called freeze function. So I will use object.freeze and then pass numbers here. Save the file and then rerun it. Now in this case, if you notice, the value at the index of 0 remained intact, immutable. It was not changed. That is, this statement had no impact on the array. So no impact as the array is now freezed. Perfect. In the similar fashion, if you want to freeze this student object and its content, so in that case you can simply pass student here instead of numbers. Fine, like this. Now in the end, you might ask a question. Among these three keywords, what should I prefer? Well, in JavaScript, start your program with the constant keyword. And while programming, if you realize you need your variables to change values, then use let. And further, if you realize you want to increase the visibility of your variable, then use var. So give priority in this order. How cool and simple is that? So in the next video, we will continue our discussion of modern JavaScript and explore the arrow functions. In this video, you will learn how to define functions in JavaScript along with what is arrow functions in modern JavaScript. So currently we are in section 2 and we are about to check out the third video of this section. So in this video, first I will talk about how to define a function in JavaScript and then gradually talk about arrow functions. So a typical function in JavaScript appears to be like this. It has a function keyword followed by its name, then parenthesis for the parameters, then we have the function body. And to call this function, we just use the function name followed by the parenthesis. So nothing new till now. Now in JavaScript, everything is an object. For example, this whole function is an object. So we can store this function within a variable. So now this variable show is referring to this function of display. So everything such as the function name along with the function body remains same. Just that we have assigned it to a variable of show here. Now to call this function display, all you have to do is use this variable of show by using show followed by parenthesis. Now unlike previous case, you cannot use the name display like this. It is not allowed. So in this case, if you notice, the keyword function as well as the name display is quite redundant. It is actually not required. You just need to use the variable of show. So here comes arrow functions into picture. So in modern JavaScript, you can use this syntax. You can just remove the function name along with the display name. So here we are only left with the parenthesis, that is the parameter part. And in addition, we have added one arrow, which is represented by equal to followed by the angular bracket. So this is where the arrow function got its name. To call this function, as you have guessed it already, you can use the name show. This will execute your code here. Great. So always remember the arrow function uses this arrow symbol. Now within this arrow function you can pass the parameters. Let me show you how. So here I have an arrow function where I am passing message as a parameter. To call this function we can use show then pass the string value or any data. Now whenever in the arrow function you just have one parameter, then you can remove this bracket along with this bracket. That is, you can straight away remove the parenthesis. Then and there our method looks like this. Constant show equal to the parameter. So notice here that we have just removed the parenthesis and everything remains same. Even the function call remains same. But it is only applicable for the function where we have just one parameter. In case you have more parameters, then the parenthesis is mandatory. You cannot remove that. And when you have multiple parameter, then of course you need to pass multiple parameter during the function call. So here just pause the video for a while and analyze the syntax of the arrow function. So let us see an example of the arrow function versus the normal function. You can always get this file from the link given in the description. And once you download the folder from the GitHub, in your terminal navigate to this folder. And within this folder you will find this arrowfunctions.js file. So in the traditional JavaScript, we used to define our function like this. And on the left you can assign it to some variable because in JavaScript everything is an object, even this function is an object. To invoke this function, we follow this syntax as discussed, normal function followed by the parameters. So this word function along with this sum method name is redundant. So in modern JavaScript, you can represent the same function by removing this part, like this, just the parameters, and then use this arrow. To invoke this function, you can use this syntax, arrow function followed by the parameters in the parenthesis. Now one more thing you can note here is that here we are using var keyword, but in modern JavaScript we are using constant keyword, just because the constant keyword was introduced in ES6. Now what is a var and why do we use constant? I already discussed in my previous videos. Kindly go through that. So here I will save the file and try to run it. Well, in both the case, the output is same, 5 and 5, because these two functions are totally same. Now in case of ES5, you can even remove this sum function name, like this, and just use function here for this normal function. The code will still work perfectly fine. Now let us proceed and discuss more about this arrow function. Now in this example, if you notice, we just have a single expression. We just have a single statement within our method body. And this statement simply returns a value. Fine. Now the same function can be trimmed down further. Let me show you how. So here let us change the function name, arrow example2. And since we just have a single statement here as an expression, so what we can do is, you can actually remove this curly bracket like this and also remove this return keyword. So this part is equivalent to this part. So when you call this function, it is simply going to evaluate x plus y and then return it, similar to what we have here. So to invoke this function, all you have to do is call arrow example2 and pass 2, 3 the value as per your wish. The output will again remain same. Let us run the code. Great, isn't it? 5. Now in a certain situation, when within a function you have more than one line of code, such as line 1, or you can say statement 1 or statement 2, like this. So in that case, you cannot remove this curly bracket. This shorthand syntax is only possible when you just have one line of code. For example, here we are returning a value, just one line of code. Fine, like this. Now proceeding, let me show you one more example of the arrow function. So here we have one more function that accepts only one parameter, and as a body I am simply going to print out the message. Now as discussed earlier in the slide, when we have one parameter in case of arrow function, then you can actually remove it like this. And to call this function, you can simply copy it and paste it here and invoke it like you invoke any other function. Save it and run the file. Well, I did some mistake. I have to pass a message here. Save it and again rerun it. Fine. Hello, Mr. Arrow. Now let us explore more. So within this function, as we just have a single line of code, so you can actually remove this part. That is the curly bracket, like this. And then save the file and rerun it. You will get the same output. Now, suppose you put this console.log, cut it from here, and paste it here, and close it like this and remove this extra bracket. Save the file and rerun it. Then that is actually the same thing. Just that right now we are printing out the returned part here within this console.log statement. Earlier we were printing out the message as a body of this function. So this function accepts message as a parameter and then return the same value as a return statement here from this function. So again, if you feel confused, then just pause the video and analyze the code. So that's all for this video. In the next video, we will explore the usage of this keyword with the arrow functions. See you there. In this video, we will see how to use this keyword with arrow functions and how it is different from the traditional usage of this keyword in the regular function. Currently we are in section 2 and we are about to check out the fourth video of this section. Now using this keyword with regular function and arrow function is quite different. This is the traditional approach and this is a modern way of using this keyword with arrow functions in modern JavaScript. Now whenever we use the this keyword within our regular function, then the this keyword refers to the caller object, which is responsible for calling this function 1. But in case of arrow functions, the scenario is different. This keyword has nothing to do with the caller of this function 2, but it simply refers to the scope where this function 2 is present. For example, if you try to call function 1 and also function 2 and then use this keyword here. Now since I know the output, so I will use dir function with depth of 0 so as to get a shorter output for this keyword. Now similarly here and log out what is this keyword here. Now before you run the code, make sure you are working within this folder. If you don't have this folder, then simply download the fresh copy of the source code from the link present in the description. Now run this file. So here we go. If you notice, for the first console.dir function, we are getting this output, which shows that the global object is responsible for calling this function 1. Since it was a regular function, so this statement has simply printed out the caller of this function 1, which is the global object in our case. But in case of arrow function, where this refers to the scope of this function 2 itself. So for this statement, we are getting this output, a blank object. Well, this blank object is basically the default empty exports object. So for each of the node file, we get a empty exports object where you can actually add some variables. Let me talk little more about this exports object. So in the example2.js, if I use this, then it simply refers to the exports object. So if I print it out, then I will again get an empty object in the console. This time I will run example2. So here I have got this empty object. For the sake of better understanding, let us add an identifier for this object. So I will create a property of object name and give it the name as the exports object. And make sure to put this statement right above this print statement. Save the file and then run it. Great. So now our exports object contains some field with some value. So within the same file, let us define an object with a function 1 as a regular function. And within this regular function, let us print out what this keyword implies within this regular function. Similarly, let us define an arrow function. Let us put a log statement where we will print out what this keyword refers to within this arrow function. Now let us call this function by using this object. So tester object call function 1. Along with this, let us call tester object dot function 2. Now clean up our space and then run the file. So here please ignore the top output which belongs to this statement. Now this output in the terminal refers to this keyword present within the regular function. Now as per our definition in the previous file, we know that in the regular function this refers to the caller of this function. Now in our case, the caller of function 1 is basically the tester object. This is exactly what we are getting in the output. From curly bracket here till here, it represents the tester object, which contains both function 1 and function 2. Now for the next output, that is for the function 2, we are getting a object. Now this object is basically the exports object, where we earlier added this property. Fine. So as per the definition for the arrow function, this keyword should refer to the scope where this arrow function is present. Now in our case, this arrow function is present in the lexical scope of this tester object, and this tester object in return is present within this file, which basically refers to this exports object. So that is why we are getting here as the exports object. Now this is one of the biggest benefit of using the arrow function in JavaScript or in Node.js. Now practically the benefit of using this within the arrow function, I will talk about it in my upcoming section, where I will talk about the event listener in Node.js. So for now, just remember, when you use the this keyword within the arrow function, it represents the lexical scope of this function, which is currently the exports object. So that's all for this video. In the next video, we will see object literals. In this video, we will talk about how to use object literals in JavaScript. Currently, we are in section 2 and we are about to check out the 5th video of this section. Now in JavaScript, we can define object in two ways. One of the most common ways to define an object is to use object literal, which you can see in front of you. We define the constant keyword, or you can use var or let, define the object name, and we define the object properties within these two curly brackets. So right now I just have a string property along with its value. So within the object literal, you can define the properties in the form of key value pair. This is the key and this is the value. Similar to this, we can define an integer and also the boolean value. Now this key basically acts as the variable name. To access this value, you have to use the variable name. For example, the object name followed by the variable name. You then may want to print it out. Similarly, let us access these two properties. Now all of these three files you will find within this folder of 2.5 object literals. Please download the source code from the link in the description. And then within your terminal, make sure you are working within this directory. Once you are sure, then run the file. So here we go, we have got these respective values. Perfect. Now within the object literal, you can define the array as well. Also note that all of these key value pairs are separated with the help of comma in the end, like this. And to access these images, all you have to do is use the index, such as 1 or 0 or 2, like this. You can try it out. Save the file and run it. So we are getting frown.gif present at this index of 2. Now within our object literal, you can also define a nested object literal. For example, here I have one more object literal named as position that contains two more properties of x and y. To access this x and y, all you have to do is use the parent object name, that is my object, followed by the child object literal name, which is position, followed by the property. In this way, you will get the value of 40. Similarly, you can access this y variable. Now let us come to our second file. Now within the object literal, you can define the functions as well. You can define the regular function like this, where the function name is onSwap. This is the function keyword, followed by the body, where the code goes here. Now the same regular function can be written in another form, like this. So the difference between these two is that I have just removed the function keyword and also this colon. So here I just have the function name followed by the parenthesis. These two are totally same. Now what about the arrow function? So for the arrow function, we have this syntax. We can have the function name followed by colon. Then we have the value as the function, where we have the parenthesis, then our arrow followed by the method body. Perfect. To access these function, you can use the object name followed by the function name, such as onSwap, onClick, and finally my function. Now let us come to our third example, where I have the blank object. Now in modern JavaScript, we have something called dynamic property syntax. For example, assuming we have a variable defined before this object, such as constant beer equal to animal. Now within my object, I have a property defined like this, key along with the value. So here I have a property bear enclosed within these two square brackets. And then I have a value of string as wild. Now let me copy and paste these code in my REPL session. So on the left, I will start my REPL and then paste the code here. Now let me ask you a question. How to access this value of wild? Well, as a beginner, you might do like this. My object dot this property of bear. Once you hit enter, you will get no value. But if you use my object dot animal, then you will get this value of wild. So what exactly is happening? Now in the runtime, this bear will be replaced by its value of animal present here. The bear will be replaced by animal. So if you try to inspect the object such as my object, hit enter, then you will find that the bear is now animal and its value is wild. Perfect. Now similarly, let us move a step ahead. Within this my object, you can actually add new properties dynamically. For example, my object dot, let us call it as property z equal to true. So this property z will be defined within this object here, whose value will be true. So this adds the new property to our object. Now there is one more syntax to add new property to our object. By using this syntax, use the square bracket followed by your property name. Let us call it as property x. Let's make it an integer value. So this again adds the new property to our my object. So let me show it to you in the REPL session. Just copy this statement and paste it here. Hit enter. Now again copy another statement and paste it in your REPL session. Hit enter. Now let us inspect our my object. If you type it and hit enter, now our object contains these two properties as well. Great, isn't it? Now moving ahead, sometimes we define a variable. For example, let us use constant pi equal to math.py. If we define the property here within my object as pi colon this pi, so this simply means that this pi is actually our key, and this pi is the same variable that we have defined here. Now in such case where we have the key and the value as same name, then in that case you can actually represent it by just pi, just one name. So this statement pi is equivalent to pi colon pi, that is key and the value. Great, isn't it? And to access this value you can use my object.py straight away. So that was all about object literals. If you are able to understand this video, then trust me, you will be able to follow along with the course very smoothly. So in the next video, we will dive into destructuring in JavaScript. In this video, we will see how to use the concept of destructuring in modern JavaScript. Along with this, we will explore what is a REST and spread operator. So currently we are in section 2 and we are about to check out the 6th video of this section. Now before you begin, make sure you get these two files from the downloadable exercise files whose link is in the description. Once you download that, make sure you navigate to this folder within your terminal. Once you are done, let's begin. Now the concept of destructuring as a beginner might confuse you, so I will try to keep things really simple. So here I am using the math module and extracting the value of pi or e or even square root and storing it inside some variable of pi, e and square root like this. Now you can apply destructuring here. So instead of writing 3 lines of code, you can just write a single line of code. So this statement is equivalent to these 3 lines of code. From the module math, we are extracting the value of pi and storing it inside the same variable of pi here. And the same thing applies for e and sqrt2 as well. So right now I will simply comment these 3 lines of code. So this is basically known as destructuring in modern JavaScript, where you just try to destructure a class and extract values out of it. Now the same thing applies for this statement as well. For example, here I am using the require function to get the file system module, which is represented by fs keyword. Now this file system module contains a read file function. So on the left, I am simply extracting out that read file function and storing it within this variable. So after this line, you can use this function and pass in the required parameters as we use it by using this file system. Now destructuring also works inside the function arguments. Let me show you an example. Suppose we have an object of circle whose property radius contains the value of 2, and here we can have some other properties as well within our circle object. Nothing new till now. Now suppose we have a function to calculate the area of the circle. So this arrow function accepts the circle as a parameter here, and then we can calculate the area of the circle by using this formula pi r square. Now let us add the function of 2fixed to get the result with the precision of 2, that is the number of digits after the decimal value. Now let us call this function. So here I am simply calling circle area, which is this function, and passing the circle object present here. And you can basically print this statement like this. Let us run this file. So the value we have got is 12.57. Now if you notice within this function we are using circle variable and here again the circle variable again. So there is a kind of repetition within our function. But as per our need, we just need the value of radius here. So here we can take advantage of the destructuring concept. So all you have to do is just use the pair of curly bracket and then define radius. Now this radius should actually match with the spelling of radius present here, which is the property of this circle object. So once you pass the circle object to this function here, so using the concept of destructuring, we can extract the value of radius present within this circle object, which comes out to be 2. So once you get the radius, you can now remove this circle prefix or the object call from here. Save the file and then rerun the file. You will get the same result. Now in our destructured arguments, you can also define the default parameters. For example, instead of 2, if I try to pass to this function a variable of precision and modify the parameters here, suppose as a second parameter I pass destructured parameter of precision and provide its default value as 2. So by default the value of precision will be 2 here. Fine. Now you can also make this destructured argument as optional by just using a equal to sign here on the right and then use the empty block like this. And if you don't pass any parameter on the right, then by default the value of precision will be 2. So if I try to rerun it, then you will find the same area. Great. Now here as a parameter, all you have to do is as a second parameter pass a new object whose property is precision. And then you can define a new value here as 5. So when you define a new value here as 5, so in that case the old value of 2 will be overridden and will be replaced by the new value of 5. And I guess it has to be a colon instead of equal to. So kindly make sure of that. Save the file and then run it. So now you will find on the right after the decimal part we are getting 5 digits. Now the concept of destructuring works for arrays as well. Let me show you how. Now suppose we have an array defined here that has the value of 10, 20, 30 and 40. Now on the left we are applying the concept of destructuring. So in that case the variable first will get the value of 10. The variable second will get the value of 20. Now as a third element here I have kept it as blank. So the JavaScript will simply skip the third value of 30 and then for the fourth variable it will assign the value of 40. So here is the output. So how smartly we have just skipped the third value of 30. Now this concept is useful when we use it along with the REST operator. Now the REST operator is represented by just a 3 dot. So let me show you an example of using it with arrays. So here I have the array on the right. Now on the left I am applying the concept of destructuring. But this time I am also using the REST operator, that is the 3 dot operator. Now this statement will result in the following output. The variable 1 will get the value of 1. This rest of item will basically extract the rest of the elements and create a new array out of it. So this rest of items will now contain the elements of 2, 3, 4 and it will be a separate array. Fine. Now you can also use the REST operator with objects as well apart from arrays. So let me show you one more example. So here I have an object, data, that contains following properties. Now suppose from this object I want to create another object by using the concept of destructuring. But in our new object I want only these two properties. That is, I want to ignore these two temp1 and temp2 properties. So for that what we can do is I will write a code here. Now since I am using the destructuring concept with object, so I am using the curly bracket here and here. Earlier we were using arrays, so we were using the square bracket, as you can see here and here. So make a note of that. So this statement simply implies that from this object of data which is present here, extract the values of temp1 and temp2 and store them within this variable of temp1 and temp2 respectively. Now the remaining properties such as first name and last name will go within a new object whose name will be person. So here is the output for that. Temp1 will be 001, temp2 will be 002, and our new object person will now contain first name as John and the last name as Doe. How cool is that? We have just created a new object out of the existing data object. Now in modern JavaScript, these three-dot operator can also be used as the spread operator, which is opposite of the rest operator. So let me show you how to use it. Suppose we have a statement. So here if you notice on the right we are using the three-dot operator, which is actually behaving like a spread operator. So here what we are doing is from this rest of item we are copying all the items and out of that we are creating a new array whose content will be same as the rest of items that we have just created here. So in short, this statement is simply spreading or copying the existing array into a new array. Now similarly we can use the spread operator with the object as well. Let me give you an example. We are creating a new object and copying all the elements whose properties will be the copy of the properties present inside the person object that we are getting here. So the new object will contain the property of first name and last name with the respective values, John and Doe. Now always remember, whenever we are using the spread operator to copy the content of this person object or this array, then remember these two will be the shallow copy. Any nested objects or arrays will be shared between these two copies. Do not forget that. So that's all for this video. In the next video, we will learn about string templates. In this video, we will see template strings, which is another feature of ES6. Currently, we are in section 2 and we are about to check out the 7th video of this section. So before we start, make sure you have this file opened, which is present within this folder of 2.7 template strings. Please download it from the link given in the description. Now in JavaScript, to define a string, you can use either double quote or single quote. Both ways are correct and equivalent. Now in modern JavaScript, we can define string like this. For example, statement equal to use the backtick. Now this backtick is present on your keyboard just above the tab key. In between these you can write any statement. Now you might ask, what exactly is the benefit of using the backtick to define a string? Why can't we use the double quote or the single quote? Well, the backtick is mainly used to introduce the concept of interpolation in JavaScript, and they can be used as a template with dynamic values. So that is why we call it as template strings. Now to use this feature of interpolation, all you have to do is, now suppose we write a statement. The value of pi is use the math module dot pi. Now if you print this statement, Save the file and run this file. Well, here we are getting the value of pi is math.py. Well, instead of math.py, what if I want the real value of pi from this math module? So for that, what I will do is I will simply use curly bracket open and then close. And as a prefix to this bracket, I will add a dollar symbol. So whatever we have written within these two enclosing brackets will be evaluated and printed out. For example, if you run this file again, then this time we are getting the real value of pi. You can not only use the variable present within the module, but also the variable of your choice. For example, I will define a message and try to use the interpolation around this message. I will use the backtick, and within this I will type coffee is great because, use dollar symbol followed by curly bracket open and close, and in between just pass this message variable present here. Save the file and run it. So here we go, coffee is great because I just love it. The another significant of using this backtick is that you can have multiple lines in the string. You can use the backtick and in between you can type your address in multi-line. If you print it out, then you will find your output present in the multi-line. How cool is that? And such features are only present with modern JavaScript. So this was a very short video. In the next video, we will learn about classes in modern JavaScript. In this video, we will learn classes in modern JavaScript. Well, JavaScript offers many programming paradigms, and object-oriented programming is one of them. As mentioned earlier, everything in JavaScript is an object, including the functions. Well, modern JavaScript, that is ES6, also added support for class syntax. Well, a class is similar to any other class that we see in any programming language. It defines the template or the blueprint for you to define the shared structure and behavior between similar objects. So currently we are in section 2 and we are about to check out the 8th video of this section. So before you start this video, make sure you have this classes.js file, which you will find within this folder of 2.8 classes. You can find the source code link in the description. Once you download it, make sure within your terminal you navigate to this folder 2.8 classes. So let's begin. Now in modern JavaScript, you can define a new class, define constructor within a class, define methods, apply inheritance, and make them extend other classes, create objects out of them using new keyword, and using those objects you can access those properties and methods. Well, it looks very similar to any other programming language, isn't it? So let's start our video. So here is a standard example that demonstrates all of these features that I just said right now. Here I have defined a class of animal, and then here I have defined a class of dog that extends the animal class. So every dog is an animal. Now in both the class we have a constructor defined. From our programming knowledge, it is known that each time we create an object, these constructors are called. So here I am instantiating one object from animal class and two other objects from the dog class. While creating the animal object, I am passing the value here. Well, this value falls here on the variable present in the constructor. Once we receive the value, we are then assigning that value to the color property. Now here, for a moment, as a beginner, you might get confused if you are not from JavaScript background. You might think that this color variable is not defined as a property within this class of animal. So how we are using this dot color equal to color value? Now in JavaScript, whenever you define this dot followed by the property, then in that case, either you are accessing the existing property or you are creating a new property for that class. Now since this property color is not yet defined within the class of animal, so in this case we are actually creating a new property of color for this class. And this color property can be accessed later, like we are accessing it here, this dot color, and printing it out in the output console like this within this function. Now the same syntax you can find it here as well in case of dog. This dot breed equal to breed name. So here again we are creating a new property for this class of dog. Now in case of dog, we have a constructor that accepts two parameters and then it creates the property of breed here. But one thing is slightly different in case of dog class. Here we have super, then it looks like a function. Well, this super is basically calling the superclass constructor. So we are passing this color value to the constructor of this super animal class, which is present here. So in this way, dog also inherits the property of color from its superclass of animal. Quite simple, isn't it? Now proceeding, in both the class, we have a function of greet that prints out the values as per the code written. Now notice here that in both the case we are using template strings of modern JavaScript. We are using backticks here and here. Now proceeding, once you are done with everything, it is then time to use these objects and call the properties or the functions. So here using these objects we are calling the greet function. So if you run the code right now, let's see what happens. Save the file. So these are the output for the respective objects. Now when you use the dog object, that is object 2, to call the greet function, then it simply triggers the greet function present here. Now in our superclass of animal, we again have another greet function. So to call this function, all you have to do is use super.greet. So this statement will simply trigger the greet function present in the superclass of animal, which is this function. So if you save the file and run it, for the object 2, the greet function of both the classes, that is its own class as well as the superclass, is called. Similarly for the object 3, which is again a dog object, the greet function from both the classes are called. So here for now, let us remove this code and then save the file. Now let us twist our code a little bit. Suppose I define a function here on this object 3. For example, I will now use object 3 dot, I will define another greet function, and let us make it as a arrow function that accepts no parameter, and its method body is again very simple. Fine. So if you notice, when this statement will be executed, object 3.greet, so in that case either this function of greet will be called or this function of greet will be called here. So let's see which function is getting called. Save the file and run it. So if you notice, when we call object 3.greet, so in that case the priority is given to this greet function which was defined later. So what happened is that in JavaScript, the content of this function got overridden and it simply replaced the old greet function. But notice here that this greet function was only applicable for this object 3, not for this object 2. And this object 2.greet simply called the original greet function, which you can find here. This one. This is the output. Fine. So this shows that in JavaScript you can override or any property or any function on the fly in the runtime dynamically. They are all allowed. It is such a flexible language. Now suppose you define one more function here, such as object 3 dot walk, and again let's make it an arrow function. I am walking. Great. Now here we have defined the walk function only on this object 3. So of course you can call this function by using object 3 dot walk function. So when you run this code, you will get I am walking for this object 3. Now this walk function cannot be applied for other objects such as object 2 or object 1, just because we have created this walk function for only this dog object 3, not for this dog object 2. So if you try to use object 2 dot walk function, so in that case it will throw the error. You can try it out. Right now I will simply comment it. Fine. Now also in the end I would like to point out something, that I have done some mistake in my code. Such as, hello my breed is undefined, we are getting the breed name as undefined everywhere. This is because here I have used this dot name, instead it should be this dot breed. If you save the file and run it, then now our output is great. Fine, so that's all for this video. In the next video, we will explore promises and async await in modern JavaScript. So see you there. Thank you. In this video, we will learn how to perform asynchronous operation in modern JavaScript. Now this video is one of the most important video for this course. So make sure you understand each and every concept with great clarity. So currently we are in section 2 and we are about to check out the last video, that is ninth video of this section. Now whenever we start any application, it might be a website or a mobile application, then a default main thread is created. On this thread we perform various operations. For example, we can perform small operation such as UI interaction, click of the button, some mathematical operation or some logical operation. Well, all of these operations falls under the category of small operation. That is, it will take a very small amount of time to execute. Now what about the long and heavy operation? Such as those operations that take a very large amount of time to execute. For example, the network operation, downloading of a file, loading images from the server, or even performing heavy database queries from the server. Now what exactly is meant by the asynchronous programming? Well, it is a kind of parallel programming in which the long-running operation runs parallelly without affecting the normal flow of your program. That is, running any program asynchronously won't affect your user experience or it won't block your UI. Now for your information, JavaScript is a single-threaded language. That is, it does not execute tasks parallelly in the background thread. It can only contain one thread, which is known as the main thread. So if you try to perform these operations on the main thread, then this will block your main thread, resulting in blocking of your application's UI. This will make user feel that your application is freezed or hanged, and your UI will become unresponsive. This will result in a very poor user experience. So the question arises, since JavaScript is single-threaded, so how do we perform these long operations? Well, in programming, every problem has a solution. So you can perform these tasks asynchronously without blocking the UI in two ways in JavaScript. The first way is to use promise with then function. And we will check out the second way when we are done with the first way. So let me show you how to do it. Before you start, make sure you got these two files from the source code of this video. Link is in the description. You will find these two files within this folder. And in your terminal or in your command prompt, make sure you are within this folder. Okay, so let's begin. So here I have a function that will fetch data from the server. You can assume that it is a dummy long operation that will take some time to execute. And there is a chance that this function might block the UI. Now notice here that this function returns a promise token. Now as a beginner, you might ask, what is a promise? Well, a promise is like a contract. It is like a guarantee that after the operation completes, it will return your desired result. So here our result is some data from this URL. So in future, after the heavy operation completes, this promise object will simply give you the desired result, not instantly, but in future as a promise. So here within the constructor of promise, I will paste some code to get some data from this URL. Well, for a moment, don't worry about this code that I have just pasted here. For now, just remember this code will fetch data from the server from this URL, and that's it. Now down below within this file, I have written some code. Our program starts and program ends. So if you run the code right now, save the file and run it, then you will find our program started and ended smoothly. Now in between these two lines of code, I will simply write a code. We will call this function of fetch data and pass a desired URL from where I want to fetch data from the server, like this. Now notice that this function returns a promise token. So on the left, I will define a promise token variable. Now this promise token is not the actual data. As mentioned earlier, it is just a contract or a guarantee that after some time in the future, it will return your desired result. To catch that result, we need to use the then function. So here I will use promise token dot then function, and then I will define an arrow function that will receive our desired result as a parameter. So I will name this parameter as promised data for better understanding and define our arrow function body. And then let us print out our data. So this statement simply means that in future, when the promise is complete or the operation has been completed, then simply execute this function where I will receive my desired result as a parameter and then use that value here like this. Great. So let us save the file and rerun your file. So here our program started and ended. Now if you notice, we have got this value in the end after some time. That is, in future we have got this result. So notice here that our program behaved normally as it was behaving earlier. It started smoothly and ended smoothly. And during our smooth running of program, we were able to perform a heavy operation whose result we have received in future as promised to us. So this simply means that by using the promise as well as the then function, we were able to execute the rest of the program very smoothly without blocking the UI. And when we got our result in future, so in that case, the then function was executed, giving us the desired result. Perfect. How cool is that? So this was our method 1 to perform asynchronous operation using promise and then function in JavaScript. Now alternative to this, we have another way to do the same thing. And this method is more preferred than the previous one. This time we are going to use the promise with async and await keywords. So let me show you how to do it. So here I have one more file of async2.js where I have written the same fetch data function that will behave as our dummy long operation. Now down below I have written the same code, program starts and ends. And these two code will act as the evidence that our program started smoothly and ended smoothly. Proceeding, here I will define a function and call it as a read function. And inside this function I will call the fetch data function and pass the same URL. Now as we know from the previous video, this function fetch data is returning the promise object or the token. So here I will define promise token equal to this fetch data function. So this function fetch data will return the promise token, correct? Of course yes. But if you use the await keyword here right before the function call like this, then the return type of this function will no longer be of the type of promise. Instead, now it will return your desired result straight away, which we were supposed to get in future. So on the left you will get your promised data directly. So this await keyword will simply wait for this function to return the result. And once we get the result here, then in that case you can further execute or print out the result like this. Now remember, when you use the await keyword within your function, then in that case you have to mark that function as async by using the async keyword. Well, this is the rule that you need to follow. I can't help in that. Now let us call this function read in between our program start and end. Save the file and then run the code. So here we go, our program started and ended smoothly, and in future we have got our desired result as promised. So in the method 1 and method 2, the output is very similar. The only difference is that we are using one other way to execute the same thing. Now as a beginner, you might get confused what exactly we are doing in method 2. So let me explain you again what exactly is happening. When the program starts, it prints out this statement. Then it executed read function. The moment it executes the read function, the control of execution immediately enters this read function here, which then executes this statement. The moment it encounters the await keyword, the control stops here and waits for the result. But simultaneously, the control returns back to execute normal flow of program, which then executes rest of the program, such as here this statement. Hence our program ended. But notice here that the control in the read function is still waiting for the result to come. So in future, the moment it gets the result from the server, it stores that within this variable and then it executes the code further within this function. With this, we will get this result printed here in the output console. So with this, we can learn that despite JavaScript being a single-threaded, we were able to perform tasks asynchronously without blocking the UI. How cool is that? Now again, this is a very important video and we are going to use the concept learned in this video in our future videos as well. So make sure you get your concept about these two methods cleared. If you have any confusion, then please re-watch the video and try the code yourself. So with this, we have reached the end of this section 2. So in this section, we first learned about what is a modern JavaScript. That is, how different is ES6 from ES5. Then we moved on to see the demo of how to define variables and blocks in modern JavaScript. Then we explored the arrow functions. We dived deeper and explored how to use this keyword within the arrow function as well as within the normal or regular function. Then we explored the object literals, how to define objects. Then we explored how to destructure elements and use REST and SPED operator along with it. Proceeding, we saw how to perform string interpolation using template strings in modern JavaScript. Then we saw how to define classes in modern JavaScript. And in the end, in this video, we saw how to perform asynchronous programming in JavaScript by using promise, async, await, and then function. And trust me, if you are able to follow this section, then you won't find any difficulty to explore Node.js from the next section onwards. So thank you for watching and have a nice day. Hope to see you in my next section. Hi, and welcome to the next section of this course. In this section, we will learn about Node modules. So basically in this section, we will focus on the module system in Node. And we will explore two important keywords, the exports keyword and also the require keyword throughout the section. So before I start, let me ask you a very basic question. What exactly is a module in Node? Well, in Node, the word module basically means a file or a folder that contains code, and that's it. So this file here contains a very simple code that says hello node. And before I start, make sure you have downloaded all of these files that is present within this folder. You can get the source code link present in the description. And on the left within your terminal, make sure you have navigated to this folder. So let's begin. So the first file right here is actually a module. However, the word module is a bit better to use than just saying the term file or the folder here. Because when you run this code present within this file, then Node does not execute this code alone. It simply wraps the code written here within a function. Well, it is something you need to remember here. The Node does not execute this code standalone. It simply first wraps this code within a function and then execute it. So let me show you what I mean. If you go to my second file of argument.js, then there in JavaScript we have a keyword of arguments. If you try to access that keyword inside a function, something like this, then this keyword of argument will simply represent all the parameters that will be passed to this function of my function. So to this function, if I pass, then all of these parameters such as 3 to 15 that are passed to this function will be represented with the help of this arguments keyword. So if you run this file, then you will find that this arguments keyword represent all the values that we have just passed, such as at the index of 0 we have 3, index of 1 it has the value of 6, and so on. We have the last argument as 4 with 15 value. Great, isn't it? So from this file your takeaway is that this arguments keyword represent all the parameters that are passed to this current function. Now let us move to our next file, wrapper.js. So here I am just going to use this statement console.log and print out the arguments. Now as a beginner, you might think that this statement is simply going to print out undefined, because in the previous file we were passing some parameters to this function and then printing out the arguments. But here within this file, we don't have any wrapper function around it. So this argument should be undefined, right? So if I try to run this file, then this statement will simply output something, such as the first element as a blank object, the second element as a require function, then we have the third element as a module object. Similarly, we have some fourth and fifth element with index of 3 and 4 respectively. Now the question arises how we are getting some output, because this statement is not enclosed within any function. So here is the answer to this. Now in Node, whenever we write any statement, then that statement is actually enclosed within a function which is hidden in nature. So this statement is basically enclosed within a function that might look like this. And the body of the function is this print statement, like this. And also note that this function receives some parameters which we are printing out here as the arguments. Now the first parameters is the exports object, which is by default blank for each of the node module. So here is the object, blank object. Now the second argument is the require function, which again you can find it here. The third parameter is the module object, which again you will find it here in the output console, this module object. Now notice here that this module object contains the exports object as a child element, and this exports object is the same element present here. Now the next element that we receive as a parameter is the file name, and this file name has the path to this file where we are currently writing our code. And the last parameter is our dir name, and this variable has the path to the folder hosting this file, which you can find again down below here as a last parameter, the element with the index of 4 here, the path to this directory 3.1 modules. Fine. Now note that these objects are not the global objects. That is, they cannot be used outside this file. They can only be used locally within this file. And these arguments are different for each of the file that you can see here. Their values might vary. So this means that for each of the node module, these objects are different. Now inside this file, suppose I do something like this. Exports dot variable a equal to define some value. And this exports object is the same object that you can find it here. So if you try to save the file and run the code again, then now you will find that our exports object contain a new entry such as a equal to 21. Then if you come to the module object, then within that module object we again have the exports object that contains the same value. So in this way you can add value to your exports object. Now this exports object is also known as module.exports. So basically this exports is an alias to this module.exports. You can also use module.exports like this. Save the file and run it. The output will be same. So just remember, this exports and module.exports are same. And notice here that this module is actually this module object, which you can find it here. So now if you notice, we can use module.exports that will refer to the same exports object present here. Great. Now proceeding, if I define a local variable of score equal to 10, then in that case, this variable again will be local to this module, because this variable is again defined within our wrapping function, which is hidden in nature. Now besides these objects, our hidden function also returns some value. Now that value is again the exports object, or you can say module.exports object, like this. And again note that it is hidden in nature, it is not visible to you, but internally this code is there. And it is again same as the exports object, like this. Now at any point of time, if you want to ensure or verify that this object or this object are same, then in that case you can simply print that out, such as exports and then try to print out module.exports. Save the file and run it. Both the objects contains the same value. How cool is that? Now as mentioned, these variables are basically local to this file. Now suppose you want to access this variable outside this file. Suppose in this file of 4require.js. So in this file I need to import this module such as 3wrapper.js. For that we have a function of require in Node and then provide the path to the module which you want to use. Now this dot slash refers to the parent directory. So we are telling Node that within this folder you will find this file or module. So once you access that file or module, then store it within a constant or some variable and call it as my module. Now since we know that every module return a exports object, which I have defined it here. Fine, and using that exports object you can access any variable defined here like this. So what I will do is I will now use my module.a. If I try to run this file, then you will get 21 here as the output. Now these two output is coming from this wrapper.js file. We have written some print statement. Now generally the module that we export in some other module, we don't generally have the print statement like this. So I will simply comment these two lines of code, save it, and then rerun this file again. Now we are getting just 21 that belongs to this statement. Now apart from these variables, you can also define some functions within a module. For example, I will keep it as an arrow function and write some code here. I am from wrapper module. So you can access this function by using myModule.display. If you save it and run it, then you will find this output. How cool is that? Our wrapper.js file is acting as an external module which we can use anywhere by using this require statement. Fine. Now this wrapper module is basically our own defined custom module where we have written our own code. Now in Node there exist a lot of built-in modules that you already saw in the previous video when we created our first application, the HTTP module. So if you remember our first application where we wrote this statement constant HTTP equal to require HTTP module. So this HTTP module is basically a predefined built-in module present in Node. So we have stored it in a variable and then using that variable we can call any functions that belongs to that module. For example, here we are using http.createServer function. And this function returns a server object which we are using to call functions further such as .listen function. But if you comment this statement, then these codes will be of no use. So this is the beauty of module. It provides a level of abstraction and without using module you cannot create any Node application. Apart from this HTTP module, there exist a lot of built-in modules such as events, file system, HTTP, HTTPS, and there are many more which you can make use of. Now since this is a beginner course, so I will talk about few of them. Well, you have already saw the HTTP module in our earlier section. So in the next video, I will talk little more about that HTTP module. See you there. In this video, we will learn more about HTTP module. Currently we are in section 3 and we are about to check out the second video of this section. So here I have my file of http module.js present within this folder. You can get the source code link in the description. Also in the terminal, make sure you navigate to this folder. Now all of these code you already saw in our previous section when we created our first Node application. The first statement has the require function that includes the HTTP module. Once we get the object of the HTTP module, we can then use it to create our server that has a request listener, and the request listener function receives HTTP request and response as a parameter. And in the response object, we can then write some code such as here I am writing hello world and finally end the connection by using the end function. And down below here we are using server.listen function that listen to this port. As a second argument, we have the confirmation callback that is executed when the server is created successfully and is running. Now let us take our discussion a step ahead. So within our HTTP response object, suppose you want to add a header along with the status code. So for that we have a special function of writeHead, which accepts the first parameter as the status code. So I will pass here 200, which means success OK. In short, everything went fine. We are sending back 200 status code as a response. And then you can define your header. So here I will type content type as text HTML. Well, this is the key and this is the value. And the content type header is a predefined header. Well, text/HTML is the most commonly used one. You can also have application/JSON if you want to send JSON response to the client. Now, apart from this function, we also have another function that only adds header to your HTTP response. For example, response object dot set header. Here I will add the header as location and then provide its value. The value could be any. Here I am just sending back the URL. You can also add one more header of your own choice. In this way you can add as many header as you want, like this. Fine. Now within this function of writeHead, suppose you want to add one more header. So in that case you can just put a comma here and define your own one more header in the form of key value pair, like this. Now proceeding, suppose you want to read a query string coming in your HTTP request object. So in that case, what code you need to write? So for that, within this request object, there exists a property known as URL. So in that case, what you can do is down below just add one more function, response object, use the write function, then use request object dot URL. So this URL is actually the property of this request object, which will extract the part of the URL that comes after the domain name. Save the file and let me show you what I am talking about. Run this code. So here our server is up and running. So let us hit that URL, localhost /9000. Hit enter, we get nothing, blank. Now right after the URL, if you type something here such as January, hit enter, so in the end you will get January here. Now suppose if you hit here as pizza, then you will get pizza here accordingly. How cool is that? Let us explore how to split the query string. That is, how to extract the query parameter if we have that coming from the client in the form of URL. So in that case, what you can do is, you can just use the URL module. Well, URL is another module which we will explore shortly in this section. But right now, let us get a sneak peek of that, what this module do. So here, let us use the URL module dot use the parse function and then use the request object coming from the client and use .url. Now this URL is basically the property of this request object, and this URL is actually the URL module that we have defined here, so please do not get confused about it. And as a second parameter, pass true. Finally, call .query. So this query will actually get all the query parameters or the query data from this URL. And then using this query data, you can extract the details. Suppose in our URL, we are getting the name. So I will use name. And also suppose we have the second key value pair of age. So in that case, we can use query data.age. Plus you can create a statement. And then on the left, you can define another variable, the message that you want to send back to the client. And instead of this, let us use the message. Save the file, shut down the server and rerun it. And now in our browser, I will just pass the query parameter. And the syntax to pass the query parameter is use the question mark after the domain name, then define your name. And this name is actually the key, which should be same as the name that we have defined here, along with define the value. And now for the second query parameter, you need to use the ampersand and define another key, which in our case is the age, which we want to extract. So I will use age equal to 25. So after question mark, you define the first key value pair and then a ampersand followed by the second key value pair, like this. If you hit enter, then you are going to get Shriyank is 25 years old. How cool is that? So now you wonder while browsing any website why you get the URL in the form of this. They are basically the query parameters. And in the server, we can extract the query parameter like this with the help of key here. Fine, we can get the value. So this was a very short video on HTTP module. Well, a lot more can be discussed here, but since this is a beginner course, so let us keep the thing simple. In the next video, we will learn about file system module. See you there. Hi, in this video I will show you Node.js file system module. So currently we are in section 3 and we are about to check out the third video of this section. So in just one video we will cover how to read a file, how to create a file, how to update a file, delete a file, and even rename the file. Now these texts written in blue are basically the function that helps to perform these operations. So let us start with read a file by using the read file function. So before you start, make sure you download all of these files. Well, you will find all of these files within this folder of 3.3 file system. So make sure you open all of these files. Along with this, in your terminal, make sure you navigate to this folder of 3.3 file system that contains all of these files. To use the file system module, all you have to do is first write this code, require fs module, which stands for file system module. And then I have the general code of creating the server and listening to that server. Now currently my objective is to read a file, and to read a file I need a existing file. So here is my file demo1.html that contains some HTML code. So here as a function body within our create server function, I will use file system module dot read file function. And as a first parameter, I will pass the name of the file, such as demo1.html. Now as a second argument, I will define a function which is actually the confirmation callback. If the reading of this file is successful, then that function will be called. Or in case if there is any error, then again that function will be called. So this function will receive the error object along with the data object. So here I will define my header by using the response object, then use the write function to define the body of our response object. Here I will use data. Now this data is basically the data which is extracted from this file. Fine, so we are sending this data back to the client and finally end the response. Save the file within your terminal, run this file. Our server is now up and running. Go to the localhost at this port of 9000, refresh the page. You will find your web page available here, some title and with some description. And this is the same content which is present within our demo1.html here. How cool is that? Now our next operation is the create file operation. We will achieve that by using append file as well as open function. So here on the right I have a file of to create file append.js where I have just written a very simple code. Now if you want, you can also follow the pattern that I have used here, creating a server, sending the response data back to the client and so on. Fine, but keeping in mind the beginners and to keep the thing simple, here I have just written a code to just create a file and add the content to it. And for those of you who are beginners, I will write the code from scratch so that you can understand it better. So I will use the file system.append file function, and as a first parameter, I will use the file name which I want to create, my new file1.txt, and then what content you want inside this file, such as hello world. Let's be simple. And then our callback function if in case there is some error or there is some success, like this. So here if there is any kind of error, then throw the exception. If everything works fine, then just print out saved. So this append file function method simply append the specific content to the file. And in case if the file does not exist, then the new file will be created, as simple as that. So here if I save the file and then run it. So here we go, the file was created and saved. If you go to your file explorer, then there you will find this file, my new file 1.txt, whose content is hello world. How cool is that? Now, if you try to change the content like hello new world, save the file and then run it, then in that case, since the file already existed, then this function will simply append the new content in the end of our old content. Like here in my new file 1.txt, you will notice this is my old content and now I have a new content appended in the end. Now to create the file, I have one more function of open. So here I will use filesystem.open function, and then as a first parameter you have to pass the file name which you want to create. In this case I am using my new file 2.txt, which will be created if it does not exist. Then as a second parameter I will pass w flag, which will ensure that I want to create a file and write some content to it. So here is the comments for that. And then I will define a callback function that will be executed in case if there is any success or some error. Save it and then run it. It says saved. Now go to your file explorer. There you will find this newly created file, which is currently empty. Now how to write some data to this file? So for that again you need to use the append file function. So if you use this function, then you can actually append some data to this newly created file. You can try it out yourself. Now there is one more way to write data to the file by using the write file function, which you will find in this file of for create write file. So here if you notice I am using the write file function, and then as a first parameter I am passing the file name where I want to write some content. So here is the content which I want to write. And then again I have a callback function for error and confirmation. Now this write file function simply replaces the content of a specific file if the file exists. Now if this file does not exist already, then in that case it will simply create a new file with the specified content. Fine. Now next comes how to update our existing file. So for that we have the function of append file and write file. And yes, these are the two functions which we already saw in case of create file here and here. Well, you can use these two functions again to update the file if the file already exists. Let me show you the example. So for that I have 5 update append file where I am again using append file. And this time I am simply going to update my new file 1.txt. If you save it and then try to run this file, then it says updated. If you go to your my new file 1, then you will notice we have some text appended in the end. This is my appended text. Now again we have one more example of updating the file by using the write file function, which we also saw earlier. Now this time I am simply going to update my new file 3.txt. If you save the file and in your terminal if you try to run it, then it says replaced. Now this function, what it do is it simply replaces all the content of this file by this particular content present here. If you check the content of this my new file 3, then now it says this is my brand new world. The whole content got replaced. Now proceeding how to delete a file. So for that we have the unlink function. So moving on, we have our 7 delete.js file where I am using fs.unlink function, and as a first parameter I am passing the file name followed by the function callback. So this function simply deletes the file that you have mentioned here. Let us try it out. Save the file. In your terminal, run this file. Well, the file was deleted. Let us verify it. So here we go. We just have file 1 and file 3. We don't have any file 2 which was just deleted. How cool is that? Now in the end, let us learn how to rename the file by using the rename function. So for that we have a file of 8rename.js where I am using fs.rename function, and as a first parameter I am passing the file which I want to rename. such as my new file1.txt, and as a second parameter I am going to pass the new file name which I want to rename it with. And as a third parameter, again I have a callback function. Great. So this function simply renames the specified file, that is this file. Save it and again test it. Well, file was renamed. Let us again verify it. So here we go, our file1 got renamed. But notice here that the content of the file remains the same. So in just one video, you learned how to read, create, update, delete and rename the file. Fine. So that is all for this video. In the next video, we will explore one more Node.js module such as URL module. So see you in the next video. Thank you. In this video, we will explore the URL module in Node.js. Currently, we are in section 3 and we are about to check out the last video, that is fourth video of this section. So again, before you start, make sure you download all of these files from the link in the description. Once you do it, you will get those files within this folder of 3.4 URL module. Once you get it, then in your terminal, navigate to that folder of 3.4 URL module. So let's begin. Now a server can be invoked by a particular URL coming from the client. So suppose this is the requested URL which looks like this. This is our main domain name. It could be google.com or smarter.com followed by /user. Now this part is known as the path name. And then I have a question mark. Now in a URL, when you encounter this question mark, then generally it is actually the query parameter right after it. And the query parameter appears to be in the form of key value pair. For example, this is the key equal to its value. And then I have another pair such as key city and the value as Delhi. Now these two key value pairs are separated with the help of an ampersand, which you can find it here. And in case you want one more key value pair, then simply put an ampersand in the end followed by another key value pair. Now you might ask how to create such URL in the client. Well, it is something which I will discuss in my some other course. Since it is a Node.js tutorial, so let us focus on its concept. Now in the server, how to parse such URL. So for that you have to use the URL module. Just use the require syntax followed by the URL module. You will get the URL module object here. And right now let us make it as constant. Always start your variable with the constant keyword. Now to parse that URL, you have to use url.parse method. And as a first parameter, pass the requested URL, the incoming requested URL, followed by true. This will give you the parsed URL object. Once you get this object, you can call its properties to get the values out of this URL. For example, if you use URL object dot host, then this statement will simply return this part, that is your main domain name. Fine. Now what about this part, /user? Well, this part is known as the path name. So for that I have the property of path name. Pretty simple. So this will return /user. Now next comes the query parameters right after this question mark. Well, this can be extracted by using the search property on this URL object. So this will return this whole part along with the question mark and also the ampersand in between. Fine, like this. Now if you want, you can also verify these output by using the console.log statement. Save the file and run it in your terminal. Well, these are the exact same output as predicted. Now this query parameter still needs to be more simplified. So how to get individual query parameter out of this search property? So for that we can do URL object dot call the query property. Now this query property simply returns the object, and this object contains the elements in the form of key value pair like we have it here. For example, it will have the country property with the value of India and another property such as city with the value of Delhi, which you can find in this URL, Delhi and India. Quite simple. Now you can get this object in a variable, let's call it query data or the query object as per your wish. And then you can call query data the property name such as country. Once you call the property, here you will get India. Similarly, you can extract the city. How cool is that? Now let us print it out. If you want, you can also verify it. So here we go, these are the two predicted output. Great, isn't it? Now moving ahead, on the right I have one more example file such as to-file url.js. Well, in this example, I will combine the file system module that we discussed in the previous video. Along with this, I will use the URL module. Let's see how to do it. So here I have included these three modules which I want to use. HTTP is the most common one. Then we have URL and FS module. Here I have written the code to create the server and then listen to a port. Now on the right I have two files, demo1.html that has some content of January, and then I have demo2.html that will print out something related to February. Now my objective is to parse the incoming URL, and as per the incoming URL I have to send back the content of either demo1 or demo2. Fine. For example, if I have the URL of domain name / suppose demo1.html, then in that case I have to send back the content of this file. And if it is demo2.html, then accordingly I have to send back demo2.html content to the client. Fine. So here I will again write code to parse the incoming URL. Now this code is very similar to what we have written here. Fine. And this REQ is basically the HTTP request object coming from the client. And then I can get the path to this demo1.html. I will use dot and then I will use URL object dot path name. Now this will represent this part on the right / and then demo2.html, whatever is on the right of the main domain name. And this whole statement file name will actually represent the path relative to the current file, such as to-file url.js. Fine. So that is why I am using dot/demo2.html. Thereafter, I will use the file system to read that file by using the read file function. Pass the file name as a first parameter and the callback function in case if there is any error or if we have a success reading that file. I will now define my header and then use write function and pass data. Now this data is basically the file content as requested present in this file of demo2.html. And this write function put that data in the body of the HTTP response object and then end the response. Now let us also write some code if in case there is some error. And this is basically useful in case if the user requests for some file that does not exist. Suppose if the user requests for XYZ file that does not exist, so in that case we will show a page of 404 not found. Send back the 404 status code along with the statement 404 not found. Save it and now run this file. Go to your browser and hit that URL such as demo1.html. We get the content as January. Let us use our demo2.html. Great, February. Now if I try to use some invalid file name such as school.html, hit enter, we will get 404 not found. So in this video, you will get a essence of how this 404 exception occur when we browse any website. That is, the user is looking for a content that does not exist in the server. How cool is that? So in this video, you have seen the code of how to use HTTP, URL and file system module all together. So that is all for this video. We will continue our Node.js discussion. So see you in the next video. Thanks for watching and have a nice day. In this video, we will explore the Timers API in Node.js. Timer API is one of the most important API used in Node.js. You can use it to delay an operation. by using setTimeout function, and you can use the setInterval function to execute the same operation in a loop again and again after some delay. So first, let us check out how to use setTimeout function. Before we start, make sure you have downloaded all of these files. You will get the link to these files in the description below the video. Once you download it, you will get this folder of 4.1 timers where you will find all of these files. Then within your terminal or in your command prompt, make sure you navigate to that folder. So let us start our video. Now to use timer, we have a function of setTimeout that takes the first parameter as the function and the second parameter as time in millisecond, like this. So let us delay our function execution by 4 seconds. So I will put 4 into 1000, that comes out to be 4 seconds. Then let us define our function. I will use the arrow function here. You can define a normal function as well. And as the body of this function, define a print statement. Save the file and try to run it. So here we go. After 4 seconds, we will get hello after 4 seconds, like this. So you must have noticed on execution of this file, only after 4 seconds we got this print statement. How cool is that? Now you can also put this arrow function within some variable, which I have done in my second file. So in this example, here I have defined a constant my function that prints out a statement. And then I have defined my setTimeout function where I am passing the first parameter as my function, and as a second parameter I am passing some delay. So if you run this file, then only after 5 seconds you are going to get some print statement. So here we go, this statement. Now what if I want to pass some parameter to this function? For example, suppose my function accepts one parameter, and in case suppose it accepts further parameter like argument 2 or argument 3, like this. So in that case, how to pass parameters to this function? So for that we have a syntax. You can use the setTimeout function itself. And as a first parameter, of course, you have to pass my function name followed by the delayed time. And then further, if you pass any parameter here, such as A or such as B, something like this, then this will eventually becomes the parameter of this my function. So this string A will become argument 1 here. Similarly, string B will become this argument 2. And further, if you pass parameters then such as 1 or 2, then 3, then these values will fall as argument 3, argument 4 or argument 5, like that. So on the right I have a file where I have defined my function. Now suppose this function accepts the first parameter as parameter 1. Then on the right as a third parameter within your setTimeout function, you can pass smarted. So if you save the file and run this file, then after 2 seconds you will get some output, smarted, it rocks. Now suppose this function accepts the second parameter as parameter 2. Then in that case, here you can pass the parameter further, is great. And then you can use this parameter 2, save the file and let us test it. So after 2 seconds again, you will get some output, smarted is great, it rocks. Now it is time to solve a task. Suppose I give you a very simple task, print the following: hello after 5 seconds and hello after 10 seconds, with a delay of 5 seconds and 10 seconds respectively. You have to perform this task with a condition. Use only one function to do that. So how will you do that? Okay, so in your file of 4 task 1, here is the question. I have this function and here is the setTimeout function. So you need to print out hello after 5 seconds and 10 seconds respectively, and for that you have to define only one function. Pause the video and think about it, how to do it. Okay, so here is the solution. Here I have defined my function that accepts a parameter of delay, and then I am simply printing out hello after some delayed seconds. And down below here I am calling setTimeout function twice. The first function delays the function by just 5 seconds as per our task, and then I am passing the 5 as a string value so that I can print it out here. Similarly, here I am calling setTimeout function, which will delay the execution of this function by 10 seconds, as simple as that. So save the file and let us try this solution. So here we go. After 5 seconds, you will get this output, and after 10 seconds, you will get another output. Just wait for it. And hence our program ended. It was pretty straightforward, isn't it? Now what if I give you another task, such as execute this function in a loop in a delay of 5 seconds, but with a condition: do not write set timeout again and again like this, such as 5, 10 and 15 seconds, and further 20 seconds or 25 seconds. So how to do it? So for that we have a special function of setInterval that simply executes a task in a loop after a specific time interval. So on the right I have one more file of 5 setInterval example, where again I have my function. This is my arrow function that will be executed after every 4 seconds. And all of these parameters we are passing within our setInterval function. Let us save the file and try to run it. So after 4 seconds, this is my first output. Then we will have another output after again 4 seconds. So in this way the code will get executed until you just close the session by pressing Ctrl+C like this. So once you kill the process by Ctrl+C, your function execution will terminate. Now in Node, how to cancel an ongoing timer? So for that, on the right I have one more file of 6 clearing timers. So here I have defined my function, and then I am calling setTimeout, where I am passing my function as a first parameter with a delay of 0 second. This means that as soon as this program starts, this function should be executed in no time. Fine. So if you try to run this code, then you will get this statement. You will not see this one. Now if I put a delay of 2 seconds, save the file and run it, then in that case after 2 seconds you will get this output, correct? Now to cancel a timer we have to do something. Now this function setTimeout returns a timer ID, such as this timer ID, which I will store it here in this variable. So using this timer ID you can cancel this timer by using clear timeout function and pass timer ID as a parameter. Save the file and then run it. This time if you run it, our program ended immediately, despite we have 0 millisecond delay. But still our program ended immediately. So in this way you can actually cancel a timer. And along with this you can also note that whenever you call setTimeout function, then this function will be delayed by this amount of time only after rest of the code is executed. That is, suppose after this statement I have some more lines of code. So in that case, this function which is present here will be executed only if the execution of rest of the code present within the file is over. Once it is done, then after this delay of time, the code within this function, that is these code, will be executed. Quite simple, isn't it? Now when you have the delay of 0 millisecond here, then we have an alternative method for that, and that method is known as setImmediate. This function just accepts the function name as a parameter, and by default the delay time is 0 second, which you don't have to specify it here, just the function name as a parameter. Now this function again returns a timer ID, which you can use to cancel this timer again. Now to cancel a timer created by setImmediate function, you have to use a special function of clearImmediate and then pass timer ID. As simple as that. Now what about the setInterval function? How to cancel a timer triggered by setInterval function? So for that, again, the setInterval function returns the timer ID, and using that timer ID you can call clearInterval function and pass here timer ID. Fine. So in this way you can call clearTimeout, clearImmediate and clearInterval according to the function that you are using to trigger that timer, like this. Now as mentioned in this file, I just told you that this function will be delayed by this amount of time only after all the code in the script is executed. To make it more clear, on the right I have a file of 7 noguarantee.js. So here I have a function of setTimeout where I have defined the arrow function that will be executed after 0 0.5 seconds. So here is the delayed time. Now down below I have a function of for loop that will be executed for about 1 billion time. In this way it will keep the main thread busy for a lot of time. So as mentioned earlier, this function will only be executed only after the code below this, that is in the script, will be fully executed. So let us save the file and try to run this file. So if you notice, we are still not getting this function getting executed just because still this code which is mentioned down below is getting executed. Fine. So it has simply blocked our UI, and until then this function was not getting executed. And if you notice, after a lot of time, it was not actually 0.5 second, this statement was executed finally. Only after this 1 billion ticks of loop. Great, isn't it? So now it is time for one more task or challenge. So on the right I have one more file where I have given you some challenge. Print hello world every second and stop after 5 times, that is after 5th second. And after the 5th second, just print done and then kill the node process. So pause the video and think about it how to do it. So on the right I have the solution. Let's check it out. So here on the top I have defined the counter variable of 0. Then I have defined my function. Then down below I am calling the setInterval function to execute this function with a delay of 1 second. And on the left I am getting the timer ID. Now within the function I am calling hello world, which will be printed with a delay of 1 second. Then with each print I am incrementing the counter by 1. Once the counter variable becomes 5, that is after 5 seconds, then I will print out done. And soon after that I will simply cancel the timer, that is kill the node process. Let us try it out. Save the file and run it. So here we go. Hello world. We are getting 5 times, and after the 5th time I have printed done here and finally killed the process by calling clear interval. How cool is that? So in this video you have learned all the basics and fundamentals of timer and used setTimeout and setInterval function. We also saw setImmediate function and how to cancel them by calling clear timeout, clear immediate and clear interval respectively. So in the next video we will continue our Node.js discussion. See you in the next video. Thank you. In this video we will talk about the event loop in Node.js. Well, the event loop will help you to perform the long-running task asynchronously in the background. Now what is meant by asynchronous operation? Well, earlier in this course I showed you this slide that the Node.js application is single-threaded. It just contains one main thread. So if you perform the long-running operation on this main thread, then it might block your UI, or it will simply hang your application, or in simple words, your application might get freezed. So to perform this long operation in the background asynchronously, we have the event loop into picture. So in Node.js, you actually don't have to worry about how to perform tasks asynchronously in the background. It is a gift to us that Node.js handle it using the event loop. Before you start, make sure you have these two files opened. You will find these two files within this folder of 5.1 event loop. Get these files from the link in the description. Once you get it, make sure you navigate to this folder of 5.1 event loop in your terminal. Now on the right, I just have a very simple console.log statement. Let us execute this file. So in front of you, you just have a print statement. Now here, I just want you to know that internally, Node starts a node process. And using that process, it simply prints out this print statement. And when the execution of your script is over, then Node simply terminate that process. So here your takeaway is that the node process by default will not keep the program running unless it has a reason to. Now let us come to our next page, where I have written the setInterval function that will execute this statement in a loop in every 5 seconds. So you can think of this function as a heavy long operation which I just showed you here. So if you execute this code, then this line of code will get printed in every 5 seconds and it will continue to do so unless we kill it by using Ctrl+C. That will actually kill the process manually. Now if you try to run this code again, then it will again start the loop and print out this statement. Now the real reason that this process does not exit automatically is that the node's event loop is busy executing this statement in every 5 seconds. So you have to kill it manually here. So just remember, it is the event loop in Node that executes the long running operation asynchronously. So just now you saw what event loop does. So you can define event loop as a medium that Node uses to process the asynchronous action, that is the long running operation, and use it to handle threads. That is why in Node.js you don't have to handle threads manually. It is done automatically with the help of the event loop. Now let us come back to our same file. Let us try to monitor our setInterval function with the help of the event loop. So here if you try to run it again, then the event loop will again start executing the code. Now on the right in a new terminal, let us try to monitor it. Suppose I type here ps space -ef and then give it a space and put a pipe symbol here and then type grep space node. Hit enter. Then you will find that here is our process which is currently active and up and running. Now you can terminate this process by using this process ID. But you can also terminate it by just using Ctrl+C. Once it gets terminated, you can go to your terminal and then again type the same code. Now you will find our node2interval.js has just terminated. How cool is that? So using this command you can know what are the current process running in your Node application. So that was all about the event loop. In the next video, you will learn more about Node.js concepts. So see you there. In this video, we will talk about the event emitters in Node.js. Now what exactly I mean by an event? Well, a click of a button can be defined as the event, or downloading a file can be an event. When the download completes, that can again be another event. So anything that happens within an application can be marked as an event. Now the question arises how to track that event and how to emit that event manually. So for that, in Node.js we have the separate module of events that deals with emitting the event or tracking the event. So on the left I am assigning this module to a variable of event emitter. After we require the event emitter class, we create the object out of it. Then on this object I can call the emit function that will be responsible to emit a particular event identified by a name. Let us call that event as test event. So this function is responsible to trigger an event whose name will be test event. Now there should be someone that should listen to this event. So here I will define a function on that will help you to subscribe to this event. Make sure the name of this event is same, test event. And then we should have a callback function that will be executed when we emit this event. So here I will define an arrow function. I will write a very simple print statement. The test event was fired. Fine. Now let us do one thing. Let us subscribe to this event 2 more times. Like this. Now here is the question. If you run this file, then how many times you think this statement, the test event was fired, will be executed? Let us try it out. Well, it was executed 0 times. The reason behind this is the sequence in which the code has been written. For example, here we are first emitting the event and then registering the event to some callback function, which means the event was emitted before it was even registered or subscribed. So if you put this statement right after these subscription like this, save the file and then execute the code again. So here we have got the test event was fired 3 times. Now if you put this code back But still, if you want these code to be executed, such as these print statement, so what exactly you need to do? Here is another question. Think about it. For the hint, the answer lies in the previous two videos in this series. Well, the answer to this is use the event loop by using setImmediate function or setTimeout function. So here I will simply wrap this function within setImmediate function, which is actually a timer function, and put this statement here within the callback. Now from the previous videos, if you remember, when you wrap any code within the setImmediate function like this, then in that case, this code will be executed, or this arrow function will be executed only if the rest of the code present in the script are executed completely. So once the execution of these code are over, then only the timer will immediately start to execute this code present within this arrow function. Save the file and try to run it. So here we go, the same output. Great, isn't it? So this events module is a very simple module, yet a very powerful module. And you will need to use it massively when you create any Node application. So that's all for this video. In the next video, we will continue our discussion on Node.js. So see you there. In this video, we will learn about how to monitor if we do any changes in our Node application, and how to make our application restart automatically by itself. Node.js in development is a bit different than many other runtime and frameworks. It does not auto-reload any changes. So every time you make any changes to your application, you need to restart it. So here is the same basic Node application in front of you that says Hello World in your browser. Right now, if you run it, then in your browser, if you hit the localhost, then you will get Hello World. So you are quite familiar with this, correct? Now, suppose I do some changes here. Instead of Hello World, I put as Hello Node. So the moment you change your application here, you need to repeat all the steps again, such as first go to your terminal and shut down the server by Ctrl+C, and then rerun the file, and finally go to your browser and refresh the page to get the changes here, Hello Node, fine, which is of course quite painful. The popular solution to this problem in Node is to monitor the operating system files such as this nodemon example.js for the saving event, and try to auto restart Node when you get these event. For this in Node, we have several NPM packages that are designed for this exact purpose, but I usually use nodemon. To use nodemon, all you have to do is go to your terminal and then type npm space install space -g for global, and then type your package name nodemon. Well, here I am using -g to install it globally. Hit enter. It will just install that package. So now it has been successfully installed. Let us try to run this file again. Now this time I will use the command differently. Instead of using node space the file name, I will use nodemon space the file name. Hit enter. Now go to your browser and refresh the page. Still we are getting hello node because no changes have been done here. Now again, let us make some changes to our Node application. Let's say hello some changes. Kindly monitor your terminal. So the moment you save this file, an event is triggered, such as the save event, and that event is cached by the nodemon package. So when that package receives that save event, then it simply restart your application automatically. So let us save it. So here we go. The moment I hit the save button on the left, if you notice, our Node application was restarted due to changes, and our server is again up and running automatically. So in your browser, you just have to hit the refresh button and you will see the difference. Hello, some changes. How cool is that? And trust me, while developing any Node application, you will require the packages like this, such as the nodemon in my case. So that was a very short video. In the next video, we will continue our Node.js discussion. So see you there. In this video, I will show you how to send an email from your local server. And trust me, it is super easy. So before you start, make sure you get this file. You will get the link to this file in the description below the video. Once you download it, you will get this file within this folder of 8 send email. Thereafter, in your terminal, navigate to this folder of 8 send email. Once you are ready, let's begin. Now to send email, we have various node packages. One of the most popular one is Node Mailer. Well, this Node Mailer is basically a module which is not an inbuilt module. So you have to include it in your project. So first I will use npm space install and then type Node Mailer. So before you use it, you have to install it in your Node application. It's like adding a dependency. Hit enter. Once you are done, clear the console, Ctrl+L, and in your folder of 8 sent email, you will find the node modules folder automatically generated for you. And there you will find this installed module, Node Mailer. Fine. So within our node file, I have simply used the require function to include that module. And then I am storing it within my Node Mailer variable. Then I am using this object to call a function createTransport that will help you to tell Node which client you want to use to send email along with which account you want to use. So as a service, I will pass Gmail. So I will define my email address. Then you have to write here the password of your Gmail account. Thereafter, I have defined an object such as mail option that contains from, to, subject and text. So in the from field, define your email address, the same email address that is present here. And I am going to send the email to smarthead@gmail.com. Define the subject, and as a text, which is the body, define something. Now notice here that I am using a backtick character so that I can define a multi-line string. And this backtick character you can find right above your tab key on your keyboard. So within this, hi Smarthead, thank you for your nice Node.js tutorials. I will donate $50 for this awesome course. Please send me payment option. Well, instead of this, you can send me any message of your own choice. I will be happy to hear from you. Now this nodemailer.createTransport function returns a transporter object. Using that object, I can call transporter.sendMail, which is the function required to send an email. And then as a first parameter, I am passing mail option, which I have just defined here. And as a second parameter, I am calling the callback function, which will be executed if there is some error or if the sending of the email was successful. So in that case, I will get some information, which I will log it out here. Now before you execute this file, make sure for this Gmail account you have enabled the permission to access your Gmail from the third-party application, like from this Node.js application. To enable that, you need to go to the browser and log in to your account from where you want to send email, which in my case is shreyang.siddhartha@gmail.com, and then go to this URL. Now this URL you will find in the description of this video, and maybe at the time you are watching this video, this URL might change, so I will simply update it. So kindly check the description of this video for the updated URL. Hit enter. You will get to this page where you have to enable this option. For me, I have already enabled it. Once you do it, go to the terminal and execute this Node application. Hit enter. So you will get this email sent followed by some message, which is the output of info.response object here. Now let us check our email. So here is my profile of smarthead@gmail.com, where in my inbox I have got this email from my other account of shreyang.siddhartha@gmail.com. So here is the subject and here is the text. Now you can even format your subject and insert some HTML text. So for that, instead of text, you can just use the HTML property followed by your content, and you need to use it as a string. So here I am using h1 tag hi smarthead, which will be the headline of my email, followed by your message, whatever you want to type, like this. So right now I will simply comment it. And also, in case you want to send email to multiple people, so for that, just you need to put a comma here and send email to some other person, such as shreyang@smarter.com. Well, I have a lot of email ID. So that's all for this video. In the next video, let us continue our Node.js tutorial and learn something new. Thank you. So far in this course of Node.js Getting Started, we have explored a lot of things. The objective of this course, as mentioned initially, was to make you familiar with core concepts of Node.js. And yes, indeed, till here we have covered all the core concepts of Node.js. But as mentioned, this was a beginner course, which means there are a lot more yet to be explored and covered. If you have heard the term of Express, Koa, Sails, or Meteor, then these are the few libraries that are worth to explore after this course. Well, in this course, so far the code that you saw was at low level. By low level, I mean that you need to take care of a lot of things and write a lot of code to implement one functionality, as per what we have learned so far. But trust me, whatever we have learned so far is fairly important and will help you to explore the world of Node.js further. So what about these libraries? What are they and what they do? Well, these will help you to implement functionalities in very less amount of time. And also, you don't have to take care of everything at low level while implementing the functionalities. Now, apart from these four, there are hundreds of packages or frameworks which you can explore. But these four are really important. And among these, Express.js is one of my favorite. So I will definitely create a course on this. Maybe at the time you are watching this video, the course on this is already published by me. So kindly check the link in the description for Express.js course. Now moving on, after this course, you should also go for the courses of RESTful Web Services in Node.js. Dive deeper into events and streams, which we explored in brief in this course. And also explore NPM, that is Node Package Manager, in detail. Well, these topics can be a course in itself. And yes, of course, kindly check the description for the link. Maybe I have created one at the time you are watching this video. And yes, your feedback is very important. Comment below what was good in this course and what else you feel can improve my course and help me to grow. For a 10-minute polished video, it takes about 3 to 4 hours of my hard work. So do support me by extending some donation. The link to donation portals are in description. So thank you for being with me throughout this Node beginner's journey. I hope to see you in my next courses. Till then, keep smiling and keep coding. Bye bye.